Hi, all you art lovers out there. This is the first in our series of Artist to Artist, brought to you by Gavin Larkin Art and branded podcasts. Here, I introduce you to the real personality behind the canvas, the actual artist who creates the work of art, a painting or sculpture, and signs his or her name on it. How many times have you looked at a painting and wondered who the hell belongs to that signature in the bottom right-hand corner or in another remote place on the work of art? Occasionally, you have to be an expert in deciphering hieroglyphics to even make out the name of the signature. Anyway, talking about names and art, in this podcast feature number 1, we are introducing an up-and-coming Cape Town artist by the name of Gavin Thomson. Okay, Gavin, we're here to chat to you and find out what makes you tick as a cartoonist and an artist. So go back and tell us how you got into this and what makes you tick and inspires you.
Well, it was almost by accident, actually. Funnily enough, I've just finished I have an exhibition currently on at the Pig Academy, and my graphics teacher came down to see it on Saturday, and it brought back a lot of memories and conversations about my school days and being a particularly poor student and never handing an assignment in on time if I ever had the assignment in.
Yes, I saw that post, and the guy's name was Radical.
His writer, he calls himself Radical on Instagram. Yeah.
Oh, I see. I thought that was quite an unusual surname.
Yeah, and he was quite, well, I wouldn't say he was radical for the time, but I have to say he was one of the art teachers that he was one of the teachers, rather, that I would actually have coffee with nowadays. You know, there were not a lot of teachers in my school that I would go back and have a coffee with, or who would want to sit and have a coffee with me. Looking at
the photograph you posted, he still looks quite young as your as your teacher back at school.
Yeah, I don't actually know how old he is, but you realize that when you're 16, 17 years old, he could have been 24 or 25. You know, and he was a surfer, and he was telling me on Saturday how he bunked school and went surfing at Long Beach when he was a teacher. So yeah, they are humans.
Could relate to him.
Yeah. I didn't bunk school. I bunked classes, but I was a bit. I was fairly kept a low profile at school. But I didn't actually excel, and even in the art, it didn't click with me at the time. So yeah, it took me quite a while after school to find what I wanted to be, or what that we were chatting earlier about. The London experience was kind of finally after 5, 6, 7 years out of school. Then kind of penny dropped.
What school did you go to, Gavin?
I was at Rondebosch.
Rondebosch, okay.
Yeah.
And obviously art was one of your subjects.
Art and graphics.
Yeah. Art and graphics.
So the graphics back in those days, art was powder paint and, fat brushes. And that's right, yeah, I think so. You had the little dog on it or something, or the Dalmatian, or I don't know. And then graphics was etching, lino cuts, and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So, yeah, even then, I suppose the education was quite one-dimensional. I'm sure they had a curriculum there to follow, but it didn't explore any aspects of art that appealed to me at all, except when it came to pop art. Yes. And that's probably when we studied Roy Lichtenstein and Andy Warhol, those people, that I suddenly went, oh yeah, I remember trying to paint the Wham painting convince my mother to paint the painting on my wall as a kid, and she wouldn't let me. So I eventually plastered pieces of paper all over the wall with masking tape, and then I painted on the thing. And I didn't think I finished that, actually. I remember that because it sat there for months, half done, which was just me, get enthusiastic about something, start it, and then, which I've learned not to do now.
Wow, and that piece became even more famous.
Well, it has kind of made its way back into my life again, which is ironic that you go this full circle and
So then when you finished at Rondebosch, what did you do there?
I did my mandatory 2 years in the army, where actually cartooning came in beneficial too, which I didn't even realize at the time, but it got me promoted. Funny story where I was working in the operating theatre at 2 military hospital, and guys knew I could draw funny pictures of soldiers. And so at the end of the day, when the whiteboard was wiped off for the operations had gone, I started drawing this narfy soldier and cigarette in the hand and leaning back and, looking goofed. And then the guys were saying, what about rank? And I went, well, we got no rank. And so we did this kind of cartoon thing with no rank. And I thought nothing of it, went home, and the next morning I was off duty and I get a phone call from the major of the theatre, and I'm thinking, she said, did you draw that picture on the board? And I'm like, Yes. And I thought, now I'm in big trouble. And she went, what's the story with no rank? And I said, well, the guys are just saying they don't have any rank. And she said, well, why do you want rank? And I went, yeah.
Why not?
It's an extra 100 rand. You could buy like a lot of beer with that. Yeah. And she went, well, then fine. I'll fill out the documentation and you can all get rank. And within days, we were all promoted to Lance Corporals and an extra $100 in your pay.
That's an incredible story.
Yeah, well, I suppose if I look back and go, that's how cartoons can work for you, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, after the army, which was the 2 years, and I studied advertising, similar field to you. And that's where I started to, in the second year, suddenly find a rhythm and excel, thinking laterally, doing not what everyone else was doing.
Yes.
And that's the important thing with advertising, was to think outside and think laterally.
Sure.
And so I studied that for 2 years. And
was that at the college?
Yeah, at the Art Directors Workshop in Cape Town. And then I was fortunate to win a flight to the UK, which much to my principal's he didn't want me to go. He wanted me to stay and get a job in an agency, which I could have, and then work my way up. And I actually came first in my college, which is astounding to everybody because I'd been at the bottom of my class throughout school and suddenly first in my year at college. But I took the opportunity to go to the UK, and there they have a different system with advertising. You have to go as a copywriter and an art director pair.
Yes.
Ad agencies aren't interested in an art director by himself. So I got a job in an ad agency just as a gopher, like running around office management and that for a few months, which was an eye-opener. Back and forth to South Africa and the UK for about 4 or 5 years before I traveled quite a bit around America and the Far East and stuff. So I was just bumming around really until the gig that I mentioned earlier about the licensing and the Disney studios.
So tell us a little bit more how you got into that.
Yeah, again, I mean, when I look back on almost everything, it is often chance or it's meeting people, and that's the connection.
Yeah.
And being open to that. And so, yeah, I had been, as I said, leaving school with pretty much no idea what I could do, what I was good at, because I didn't think I was even good at art. At that rate, I'd practically almost failed art. Graphics, I did okay. I think I got a B, which was my highest by a long margin. But I've been doodling cartoons, as I said, in the army and on letters when I wrote to people. But I got so out of it. I remember I was in Greece and one of the places said to me, well, if I draw their chalkboard for them, they'll give me a few nights accommodation. And I struggled. I was trying to do a windsurfer and a surfer. I mean, you look at what I do now and I could do it with my eyes closed. But then I was so out of practice that I gave up and said, look, I'll just pay for my accommodation, forget the drawing. It was just too much stress. But so I was in the UK and I'd been on the dole for a while, which was great in one sense, but also a very bad thing in the other because it just makes you lazy. And I can see why people aren't motivated to do anything, because why would you? You get paid to sit at home. And while I was on one of these get back to work schemes by the government, I met a very cool ex-art director, and we would sit and smoke and drink coffee outside and chat about life and everything. And he mentioned a friend of his who did licensing work, and that was how he made his living. He lived in Cornwall. He'd paint the picture and send it to the studio. And lo and behold, there was a studio right there in London which did exactly that. And I thought, I can't believe you can actually do this for a living. Of course, my work was completely not up to scratch for it, but I went in, met them. They were very gracious and said, this is the quality we do. Take this picture home with you, copy this, see if you can get close to it. But I'd also just reached a point in my life where I decided I wanted to do something. And I suppose that came at about 25, reading a few self-help books and just suddenly getting passions are difficult. Well, I suppose so. Just suddenly realizing what you want. Direction. And when you want it, then you go for it.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, friends at school are going, I can't believe you work that hard. But you suddenly will work all hours to get this stuff done. And I did. And I took it back and it was okay. And she was saying, well, it's looking a lot better.
Describe the picture to us, Gavin.
This was a Disney picture.
Yes. And the subject?
Yeah, it was Dumbo, the flying elephant.
Oh, okay.
And then obviously an artist just completed a cover for one of their magazines. So she just did a color copy for me and said, this is the kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I took it home. I bought all the materials. I had an airbrush that I'd had for years, but I didn't know what to do with. Suddenly it was all beginning to fall into place. There was a reason I bought that airbrush.
Yeah.
And so back in those days, we were airbrushing using a Pantone palette. And, you had to match the colors to the Disney palette. And then you had to do, and the real art was the outlining around the characters. Yes. And that was when you had to have a key line and it had to be smooth and come to a point at the end. So that was a skill that required about 6 months of practicing.
Yes, very steady hand.
Yeah.
And those curved instruments.
A lot of we didn't even use those. You just had literally had to, you just drew. And it was a hold your breath and put your brush down and then go, I'm doing Winnie the Pooh's stomach and I'm going, that's it. And there's no margin for error, not like an iPad now, you can double tap and redo it if you want. So yeah, I think there was a crunch job and they needed an extra hand and they called me up and said, could you come in and do some work? And I came in and did that job. And at the end of the day, I kind of went, and they said, well, come in tomorrow and the next day and then the next day. And then I just stayed.
And that was your breakthrough that set you on your
That
course.
was, yeah. I mean, and totally. And working with unbelievably talented I had to pinch myself going, what am I doing here? Because it was a studio of about 12 or 15 artists, but then there were about another 20 artists living around the UK who they farmed work out to, but they didn't get to work in the studio. So you got to come in, sit in the studio with that like experience around you, just looking at other people doing stuff. And then your level of skill just goes up with all that. You just go, you're now in the big leagues. And so it was stressful too, because I can remember, thinking, am I good enough? Can I? And then when I hit that stride with the brush stroke, they just threw work at me for years.
Okay, so just to pick up, Gav, you landed this job now at this agency. How long were you there for?
I think it was about 2 years.
About 2 years, and then where did you move to from there?
Then again, another chance phone call to a friend back here, and Julie had now. I'd met my wife Julie. Well, she was my wife then, but she was an English woman, and
so you got married in England?
No, we didn't actually. We were living together there, but she'd come out for a holiday to Cape Town. I'd shown her where I was from, and she loved Cape Town. And I think, I was just getting to the point where I had enough of the weather and waiting for summers that never arrived. And so a conversation with a friend back here who said, well, why don't you come back and work with me? I'm in, funny enough, construction business, and you can have work immediately when you arrive. And I hung up the phone, thought nothing of it. And then Julie said, well, why don't you, go out and see? It was straight after the elections, or it was more or less, it was about 97, and that Mandela magic. And I had a lovely story where I met a friend of mine on one of the holidays on Noordhoek Beach, and we'd been friends back at school, and he was like, Gavin, it's like the Wild West here. You can come out here and you can buy a piece of land, you can build your house on it, and you can do whatever you like. And that magic and that Madiba stuff. And he had a house in Noordhoek, he had a plot in Noordhoek as well, which he'd been talking about building on for years. And I went back to England with this idea in my head going, imagine, and what was different was that in the UK, everyone just seemed to be just going along. Everyone knew like what was happening next. In South Africa, everyone was excited and they were planning and scheming. Everyone you met was starting a new business or they were doing something. And
fantastic time.
Yeah, so that's what grabbed us. And we did exactly that, which is ironic because I did come out to work with this chap, but that lasted about 2 months when I just got totally frustrated with how slow the building business works. And I just couldn't go on site and see nothing getting done for days on end. And so a job came up at a design studio here in Cape Town, which was supplying all the graphics to Woolworths for the children, which was exactly the character stuff. So Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, Disney. So it was amazing. I mean, I didn't have the computer skills, but I blagged my way into the interview and told them I knew a little bit, and they gave me the job. So I came straight back to doing licensing work here, but now on a more advanced scale of the computer aspect, which it was a very steep learning curve.
Crash course in computer drawing.
Convinced that every day they were going to find out I knew nothing and then fire me. But thanks to a lot of nice guys in the studio who would lean over and go, Control Alt Delete, or this is how you do it. And computers back in those days.
What program were you using?
Corel Draw and Photoshop, and I knew nothing. And computers there would also freeze and crash all the time for no apparent reason. So if you didn't save and back up, but it was a blessing because I stayed inside the industry and worked with Disney and Warner Brothers. They were very excited that I'd come from the UK with all my experience, but which wasn't a great deal apart from just being able to draw characters. And yes, I stayed there for also about 2 years. But I think it's like this 2-year pattern where you get restless. I was going, and then my children were about to be born, my first child, and I decided I wanted to be at home doing that. And so I was actually the manager of that studio, but I realized I couldn't be the manager and work freelance.
Yes.
So in the end, I had to resign as manager and then go freelance. So I kept them on 2 days or 3 days a week, which was nice because of the retainer. And then I could work from home. So my clients I could do on a Tuesday and a Thursday and then do work there on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, until the work between days became more. And I could say, look, lose that retainer and just go proper freelance. That scary leap when you go, now you got no salary. It's up to you to make up that.
You're your own boss now completely.
Yeah, and you've just had 2 children and you just bought a house and you got a mortgage.
It's motivation for you.
So you have to have a very understanding wife, a very supportive wife too, which let me not forget that, she's been incredibly giving when it comes to that, because most would go, you're nuts. You're not giving up your job. You stay there. And
That's interesting. So that's when you were completely on your own, freelancing, and the Gavin Thomson brand took off.
Yeah, at the time it was called the Little Blue Beetle Design Company, which still knocks around. I've still got the Little Blue Beetle.
Yes,
and,
I saw that.
I thought it was a good idea.
On your Instagram post.
Yeah. So it was quite good, because no matter where I worked, everyone remembered the Little Blue Beetle. So when I invoiced and I would chase it up, and they'd say, "Who are you?" and I'd go, "The Little Blue Beetle." And of course, you forget a name, but you never forget that Little Blue Beetle.
Yes.
But gradually over the time, that's fallen away, and the brand Gavin Thomson is.
Yes. It's a nice identity too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like
nothing
the Beetle.
nothing like your own name.
Well, the Beetle is classic. It's timeless. It's not pretentious. It's reliable.
Yes.
It's affordable.
It's iconic.
Totally. So that I loved all those things about it. That it wasn't, it would fit a nice brand if you thought about it, because that's what you want: steady and reliable, and it holds the family.
And it's increasing in value every day.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
So the Beetle
probably as much as your house here in Noordhoek.
I'll sell them both as a job lot one day. Buy the house, you get the Beetle thrown in.
Yes. I'm sure your kids are saying, "Don't sell the Beetle, Dad."
Well, it's funny because, up until about 17 or 18, they didn't think the Beetle was very cool. But they all grew up in the back of it. I've had it more than 25 years now. But now suddenly it's like, and it goes so beautifully that it is. It probably will be a bit of a fight over who's going to get it.
Yes. I remember quite a few years ago when I left college and also started working in the ad agency, I had a beach buggy, which had a Beetle engine.
Yeah.
And my dad encouraged me to strip the motor and rebuild it, which was a fantastic experience to do with your father.
Yeah.
And we rebuilt the engine and put it all back together again, and my beach buggy was good to go for another 100,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
Talking about Beetle.
Yeah, no, I've never tried to dabble in my engine. I know my limits and my limitations.
Yeah.
I did once try and adjust the points, and the car just stalled and died. So I've now got electric points in it, so I don't touch it. Leave that to the experts. But
Oh, good. So Gavin, where to from here? You've been cartooning, basically up to a point. And now you have been for a few years now moving more into a fine art direction.
Yeah.
Taking your cartooning into a fine art direction. So tell us a little bit about that. How that transition came and why you're doing it, and possibly the benefits it's having for you.
Yeah. Well, the cartooning was also an accidental thing, bumping into somebody, and the strips just, it almost sounds like, oh, geez, it just happened. But we had no idea at the time. We were talking, it was 18 years ago now. Next year will be 18 years that we've been in print. And we were kind of naively thinking, well, there must be a market for comic strips in South Africa, because there is only one. It's Madam and Eve. And so if we draw a comic strip, it'll be easy to shoe in. We didn't realize at the time how difficult it was to get a comic into a newspaper in this country, where you're dealing with comics that are 50 to 100 years old, like Modesty Blaze and Charlie Brown and stuff, which they don't want to let go of because their readers love these. So anyway, we finally did crack the newspapers, and then it grew from that. And so, Treknet and Mama Taxi have been running. Well, Mama Taxi, we retired a couple of years ago when the writer passed away. But Treknet is still going, and it's still in the Cape Times and the Star in Johannesburg and the Weekend Argus. Treknet, yeah. Yes. And then probably about 5-6 years ago, again, through just chance meetings with people and starting to paint and joining this group of artists and not knowing what to paint, looking at a blank canvas for weeks on end, and I would do my cartoons and cheat. I'd just take my work with me and work. But these canvases were sitting there. And then out of that grew, for no apparent reason at all, but the Starry Night series. I started doing the Treknet characters in a painting with the Starry Night background.
Okay.
And I just started experimenting with that.
So just to go back, what made you join this group?
Just meeting a person who was exhibiting some work, and then we got chatting, and she said she'd also had she'd once had an art group, and I said, yeah, well, you should start that up again. She said, well, I'll start it up if you come along and assist,
Okay.
What happened in the end was we started and then she left, and I ended up running this art group for about 5 or 6 years or more. But it was just a little space where you could meet and paint or do whatever you liked for that matter. It was one Wednesday morning, and we alternated Wednesday morning, Wednesday evening, which was a very useful thing because I say to people, it's like the gym. You might buy yourself an exercise bike and say, I'll do it all at home, but you won't. You've got to go to the gym, and that inspires you. So you could put your easel up in your corner of your room and you could have all your paints, but you won't ever get to it. But if you get in the car on a Wednesday and you drive to a place, you pack it all out, you chat to one another, you paint for an hour and a half or 2 hours every week. After a year of doing that, I had over probably 20 or 30 paintings that I didn't know what to do with. I'd just been painting and building them up. And so it goes to show you don't need a lot of time. All you need is 2 hours once a week to do that. And then I was having a chat with a friend who wanted some advice on an auction she was doing. And she saw all these pictures around my studio and went, what are you doing with that? And I went, I don't know. And she said, well, I've got an art gallery in Gogh Bay called the Art House. And do you want to have an exhibition there? And I was like, why not? And it was it was great in the end. It was a lot of work, but in the end, it all sold out. I mean, all those paintings. And so that was about 6 years ago. And that's kind of where it started from. Because so then it was, moving on from the Starry Night to something else. But all the time doing the cartooning in between. So that's essentially my bread and butter is the cartoons. So being able to marry the cartoons and the art is where I wanted to go. Also because you look around, you don't see a great deal of that. And it's the kind of thing that appeals to me. If you see my paintings that are or the ones that we bought as well.
Yes.
To paint what you like or what you would hang in your own room. So sometimes you look at your own work and go, well, I'm not sure I'd hang my own work in my home, but I'm trying to moving towards that, going, if I like it, then perhaps someone else will like it as well.
Yes. Now, I've looked at it and you're hitting a very interesting combination of a cartoon style and an illustrative painting style.
Yeah.
So what gives you that inspiration, Gavin? When you wake up in the morning and you think, what should I do today, or what should my next subject be? How do you get to that?
I think keeping a sketchbook is useful because sometimes I have to go back to my sketchbook and flick back and then see something I'd forgotten I'd written down. Ideas they come to you,
yes.
And if you don't use them or you don't write them down, they'll just go. And so many. I mean, when I cycle, which I do 2 or 3 times a week, as I'm riding, ideas are popping into my head, and I know that I'm not going to remember them all. From time to time, I might stop and jot something down in an email to myself.
In your notes.
But I know when I get back, I'll go, what was that brilliant idea I had? And I was like, I cannot remember. And it's that $1 million one. So that was going to be the one that was going to make me rich. And I've forgotten it. Or that gag that was so funny that you can't remember.
Yes.
So keeping sketchbooks. And I mean, I don't know if everyone's like that as an artist, where you just got a million ideas in your head. And it's just a case of which one you're going to start with.
Yes.
And you could, each one you need to spend time doing. So it's that choosing. Shall I try this? Yes. And so time is important, I suppose, to have that time to play, because I think it comes out of play. When you're enjoying yourself and just doing something for fun, that's when accidents, what was it Tony Ross used to say, the happy accidents or the happy mistakes.
Yes.
You just suddenly do so. And bouncing around, I think it's a bit like a comedian. I know a couple of them. And when you chat with them, they'll throw out gag lines one by one by one. Half of them aren't even that funny, but every now and then one is.
Yes.
And then they go, well, that's it. So if you throw out enough content, eventually you're going to hit something.
I know exactly what you mean, because I have sometimes when I'm walking on the beach or perhaps riding my bicycle, but very often that period when you actually come out of a deep sleep and you kind of semi-awake, you're semi-conscious. I have incredible ideas going through my head, and they just come.
Yeah, you write them down.
And well, that's the trick, because you are sort of semi-conscious. And it's quite hard to write them down. And sometimes, like you're saying, it's very hard to remember them.
Yeah, that's a gift. When you wake up and you dream a painting, and I think one or two of those have been like a dream where you go, what about that idea? Or, right now off the top of my head, I can't remember the ones, but I know there are some that just go boom.
Yes.
You go, I don't even know how I thought of that, but it just came in. Sometimes you also got to be careful because we see so much stuff, the content around us, that you're going, well, I hope I haven't just seen that somewhere else and I'm doing something that someone else has already done.
Yes. So, for instance, your Starry Night Nights Over False Bay, that series.
Yeah.
How did that?
Well, I wasn't obviously trying to pretend I wasn't Van Gogh or doing it. So that was fun because it was almost like, because I wasn't doing it for the intention of selling them one day, I was just doing them for the sake of doing something at this cafe group that we had. And what was great about that was, to do it, you had to study the painting first. And then you started to look at the layers and how I did it and going, well, it's a lot more to this than I actually thought there was. And you paint it. And so I did that, and I did the Scream, I think, and I did the cornfields with a cartoon character, Koos from The Farmer. And and then I did see later on that Calvin and Hobbes had done something very similar, and so did Charlie Brown with Snoopy. I'm not quite sure when, but I hadn't actually seen that at the time. I think theirs was like it was very colorful. And so I wouldn't intentionally try and tread on anyone's toes.
Sure.
So once you realize it, but if you see the latest one I had up there, it's evolving from the lines that Van Gogh used to more of a dot tone. So somewhere in between Roy Lichtenstein and Vincent van Gogh. I suppose that's where you start to come out with something that's your own. You can say this is now becoming recognizable as something that only you do.
Yes. So what ideas have you got for your paintings going forward, like in the next few months? Have you got any concepts or ideas that that are down in your notes?
I can't tell you.
Do you want to share them or
not? No. More time to paint. I need to do that because I have, as I said, a million ideas, and I find that it's just the time at the canvas that makes a difference. So it can be, you often can't tell. You might have a great idea and think this is where I'm going, but it ends up going in a different direction just on the day. So I do need to put out some more content because that is my problem at the moment, is that I don't paint quickly enough, or I don't, but I think of it a bit like they used to talk about the British movie industry. I remember when Chariots of Fire came out, they went, well, the British don't make a movie very often, but when they do, it's like a 5-star. And I thought, so I go, well, I don't put out like 20 paintings a month, but when I put out one, it's going to be 5 stars.
Let's hope they got that train of thought with their soccer team at the World Cup at the moment.
Like coming home. Yeah. I don't want my canvases coming home.
Just a reminder that you are listening to Artist to Artist, a podcast interview with artist Gavin Thomson and artist Gavin Larkin, and produced by Greg Kokoveos from Branded Podcasts.
Richard Scott, for example, is very generous with his information.
Yes.
Mark Alexander as well, from the Studio Gallery, who just believes in, sharing. I mean, I know I worked with someone in the UK who just thought, knowledge is power. So if you've got the knowledge, don't hand it to anyone else. But I don't believe that. I think, you've got to have that abundance attitude as opposed to the scarcity attitude.
Yes.
Where, if you're too worried that someone's going to take your idea. But and artists always are, what paint you're using, where do you get it from? And
Now look, there's that risk that people are going to copy your stuff.
Well, that's why it's important to get it out there quickly. So I got a couple of ideas, which, it's kind of, I'm worried I'm not going to get to them quickly enough. But and then you show them too soon. But Instagram's like that. If you stick it on Instagram, it's out there. But I suppose that works in your favor too, because then someone can say, look, you can go back and see my Instagram feed and see that I put it on there.
Yes.
Because Richard's got in point. I mean, I did stickers with the traffic signs, but small ones for the surfers. And the idea was actually skateboarders as well. So they're just a little black figure doing a little move.
Yes.
But then suddenly, all of a sudden, Richard's got the whole street sign thing. I gave him some of my stickers. So predates yours. But sometimes you got to go, damn.
Yes.
And how often? I mean, like comedians too, going, I wish I'd thought of that line.
Yes.
But you didn't. And somebody else beat you to it.
And then very often it's just a coincidence. Another artist has just come up with this.
Exactly. And then the thing of also just originality too, because I have noticed as well is that when a trend kicks on, they said it was cartoons as well, is everyone trying to be a Larson or something, going, don't be a Larson, because there's already a Larson. We don't need another Larson. We need somebody we don't even know yet. Yes. And so there's a tendency to, and maybe galleries drive this as well, is saying, we want this right now. Yes. So everyone rushes out and tries to do what they think the people want. Yes. But in the end, I mean, we were chatting about Vincent van Gogh early this morning when we were walking the dogs, and going, he was just painting because that's what he wanted to paint. I didn't know a great deal about it. I wasn't paying attention at school, as we've discussed. But his early works were just kind of pretty commonplace. There were pictures of yachts in a bay, and that you wouldn't have said that was Van Gogh. You just go, there's a plein air painter.
Yes.
But when you hit the Starry Night vibe, there was no question.
Yes.
who he was. And he clearly wasn't worried about public opinion because he wasn't selling a thing and people were going, what the hell are you painting?
Yes.
But sadly, he didn't get to benefit from it. But
and I think there was a time from his early work, if I can remember my history of art correctly, that style of his, that particular style of the thick paint and the stripes really started taking. Yeah. So it moved from from a general and plein air impressionist type work to his very, very recognizable style. Yeah.
And I think that was what I said earlier about just playing, having the time to play, because by doing it over and over, you just evolve. And so one day you just go, well, I'm just going to try this now. And then it starts to go in that direction.
And it works for you.
So one has to just experiment and play around and see what comes.
So Gavin, I saw in one of your Instagram posts with your beautiful studio here, which I love, you were playing the music of David Bowie.
Oh yeah.
As you took people on a visual experience around your studio.
Great fan.
And it was David Bowie from the album Ziggy Stardust.
Yeah. One of my favorites
too, from the 70s.
And I've had that album for not quite that long, but yeah, it's a beat up old cover and it still plays.
Yes, and you've still got the original.
I've still got the record, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic, yeah.
So yeah, I have a vast record collection of vinyl. Not vast, but pretty big.
Yes.
And a huge amount of CDs, far too many. And I've still actually got all my cassettes and a cassette player here. So the irony is that I've probably got everything in duplicate. I've got a cassette of it, a CD of it, and a vinyl of it. And yeah, so music does play a very big part of my creative process.
Yes.
So
what other music from the 70s do you really like?
I'm a kind of an 80s guy. So pretty much a lot of the 80s. I worked in a record shop in my teens as well. And as my brother was a musician, always a musician, so I grew up around local bands.
I saw Jimi Hendrix, The Police, Pink Floyd.
Always, definitely those, and then always discovering more. I've just bought, I trawl the charity shops and find stuff. Just watched a very interesting documentary on the chap who buys the records for a festival in the US, and he just literally buys anything that looks interesting. And I suppose it's like saying if someone took the time to make a record and press it and design a cover, there's got to be something in it. Sometimes not, but you buy something and it's so random. So yeah, I'm always listening to new stuff and discovering old stuff that I missed the first time around for some reason when you're having kids and you weren't listening to stuff and then suddenly it comes up and it's like discovering a whole new band again.
You're so right. You come across a piece of music that was clearly so well known way back in the 70s or 80s.
And you go, where were you when that was happening?
Why didn't I know about them?
Which is great though, because you can rediscover them.
Yes.
And then you go through a whole collection.
The case in point was actually U2. I first discovered U2 when my first child was not quite born yet, but he was almost born.
So which album was that? Do you remember?
I can't remember the album, but I know my wife and I were traveling to a wedding from Joburg to Cape Town, and we were in Colesberg, and we stopped at it was boiling hot. You know what it's like in Colesberg in midsummer. And we stopped at this little cafe and we went in there and we bought some cold drinks and something to eat. And there were a few cassettes on a rack. And I bought Black. Do you know the artist Black?
Yeah. So that dates it because you can tell when Black was around.
Who I absolutely love still. And I bought a U2 album. And we got our cool drinks and we got in the car and we carried on to our journey and to Cape Town. And I put the U2 in and I didn't really like it so much. Took it out and I put the Black in and I loved it. And we probably listened to that on the whole journey. And then a long time afterwards, maybe a year or two later, I started listening to the U2 and then I really just absolutely loved it,
I'm guessing it might have been the Joshua Tree.
I think it was the Joshua Tree.
Because that was where everybody, and I remember I'd been a fan because I got to see them when I was a teenager in the UK. A friend of mine, I went over on holiday and we went to see them on the Unforgettable Fire Tour. So that was Pride in the Name of Love and Sunday Bloody Sunday. And I was a huge fan and none of my friends were into them. It's like, don't you know, so back in October and War and all those bands. And then With or Without You came out and then With or Without You. And I went and that was one of the first albums I just bought without even listening. I just went in the record shop and I bought it and I took it back and I also put it on. I thought, what is this? It was so mellow and so like different. And it has become one of my most favorite albums of all time. If I had to choose a Desert Island 10, that would be in it.
Yes.
It's just such an amazing album.
Yes.
Amazing.
Sidetrack. Yeah. So I'm just moving around here a little bit. So really, what paints and materials are you using? Not to give away any Gavin Thomson secrets.
Everyone tells me, and then I listen, and then I use the same. So yeah, I'm acrylic. So I just went and got all the normal, usual acrylics. Don't even know the brand names. But more recently, the Shube.
I think I see the name Dala back there.
Yeah, that's one of the. Yes. That's one I don't use. Yes. Dala. No, okay. Dala's local, isn't it?
No, not Dala, but there is a local brand.
Iris or.
I just can't remember the name now.
But then more recently, I've just bought Shube.
They're local.
So yeah,
they've got a factory in Cape Town.
Yeah. So yeah, experimenting with various ones because certain colors go on much better than other colors, and so yeah, I like flat color, so I want to get good coverage and stuff. Yes. So, but then I also work with spray paint, and I work with it's mostly acrylic, spray paint, and pen.
Yes.
So yeah.
And are you doing any of your artwork on the computer?
I do. Well, this is all the cartoon stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. So
well, you don't need pads. It's all creative.
Which is a lovely, clean medium to work on. But yeah, the iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil just revolutionized drawing on a computer. So I've been waiting because, like I said, I started off in the UK with an airbrush and cutting out masking film and airbrushing and dirty and messy and paint everywhere, to skipping the whole tablet and stylus phase. I didn't like this looking at the screen and drawing down here. And then when this came along, you're literally drawing straight onto the screen, and that was it. Wow. And just out of necessity, I think my old laptop, which I'd nurtured for about 10 years, was failing had a new hard drive put in, did everything to try and keep this thing going, to avoid having to shift to something else. But then got the iPad, and one day the computer did crash, and I had a deadline for that day, and I had to basically use the iPad, figure out how to email and do everything, and never look back.
Could you ever have imagined back then where you'd be now? I mean, with frisket paper and knives and airbrushes, to doing it all on computer with a pencil.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy about that is when I was in the UK working in the studio, and my friend Kieran, who worked opposite me with the airbrush, and we had one computer on the top floor, which a lady called Mickey, and her Mac, and this Macintosh. And it was like, wow, this thing can like bend text, and it can do this kind of stuff. And we genuinely sat there thinking, you know what, we don't need to learn these computer silly things, because we traditional airbrush artists, they'll always need us. Yes. So, and I bought a Mac back then with 4 megabytes of RAM on it, and I bought Quark Express and Illustrator and a tutorial cassette or disc, and I used to try and teach myself to use this, and it was frustrating. And that was the experience I told the people here in Cape Town that I had when I arrived, going, I know computers. All I knew was how to switch it on, and it was a Mac instead of a PC, so I was completely... But we genuinely thought maybe we can just sidestep technology and just keep painting, drawing, which ironically you can, I suppose, if you're a painter and artist. But from a commercial point of view, there was just no way you were going to, the airbrush. I left the company in 97. I don't think they lasted many years after that, not just because I left, but just they just had to move with the technology.
Sure. Can't beat technology. Yeah. So Gavin, when you're not painting and creating, what are your hobbies? What do you enjoy doing? Sport? Leisure time at home? I
like a lot of time off. I'm quite that's one legacy from school that I kept, which was being kind of lazy. But no, I do like to keep a balance between it isn't always possible, that work-life balance. But I must say we do eventually, after having gone through the whole mill of late nights, working weekends, doing all that. And with children growing up and going through schools, you get to a point where you can now actually slow things down a little bit. So I cycle. I'd still surf when I get an opportunity, and I should do it more often. But yeah, typical.
That mountain biking, yeah?
Yeah, but I do road biking. Not road biking, but I ride the mountain bike because of where I live. Okay. Straight out the door and up Chapman's Peak and down Hart Bay Beach.
On the road?
On the road, yeah.
Yes.
And I do that 2 or 3 times a week just for exercise, and also just to clear the head. It's your space where you think, come up with the ideas, and you see these spectacular sunsets, which if you follow me on Instagram or usually Facebook, these nauseating sunsets going, look, I'm on the bicycle again. But people say they love it. I always say, look, I probably should stop doing it. They go, no, people who live in the UK are going, no, we love seeing them.
So surfing and cycling
Yeah, walking dogs.
70s, 80s music.
That as well. And actually, when you do something that is your hobby, then it is your hobby. So
Yes.
if I was, like we were saying, my wife and I chatting yesterday about what it's like to have a holiday, as an artist, or what's a holiday again? So when I worked at that company, and I remember shutdown being about 17th December, they used to do it just after the Reconciliation Day, I think, and we'd shut down for 3 weeks. And I can remember that, putting your sheets over your computers going, oh, we're out of here.
Yes.
And also, like, a split second later, you're taking them off again. It's January and you're back there. But that feeling of walking out the door and going, I don't have to do anything now for 3 weeks.
Absolutely.
I'm on holiday, which you don't get when you're a freelancer. Every year comes to Christmas. It's probably my busiest time, trying to get everything done for the clients who want things done before the end of the year.
Yes.
But when it's your hobby, then you don't need to say, I take my holiday throughout the year. I live my life like I'm on holiday. And I do a little bit of work in between.
Well, I can relate to you walking on the beach, because I bumped into you there earlier this year.
Yeah.
I was painting in a plein air competition.
That's right, yeah.
And
up on the top of the sand dunes.
Sitting on top of the sand dunes in a boiling hot, and along came Gavin, which was a welcome few minute break.
Well, that's our local, yeah. So our dogs are spoiled. They get to go to Fishhook and Noordhoek twice a day usually. So so that they'd say that's my day, starting off with the crack of dawn, taking them for a walk first.
And hobby-wise, Gavin, cooking, woodwork, or fiddling around.
Yeah, I like to garden. As you can see, it's in a bit of a transitional phase right now.
Yes.
So always doing something. Always, I think I'll never be bored, because like when you talk about what's retirement, but I would never retire, because there's always so much stuff that you want to get to.
Yes.
So I should make lists as well, because when that does come, you go, what am I going to do now? But I've always got another thing that I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
I suppose that's what keeps you getting up in the morning and going, moving forward.
Sure. And reading?
I try to read.
Any books you're reading? You enjoy reading?
I've been reading the Dion Mayers, and then I've also just started reading, or into the third book, I think now, of the J.K. Rowling's series of her detective one, which she goes under another name. I've forgotten, like a man's name. So the idea was that no one would know who she was, but apparently someone outed her because she wanted to try and distance herself from Harry Potter. And she writes a very nice novel on an English detective and etc. But with all the other medias, you skip between. So when I'm working, I get to listen to audiobooks, and I went through the whole Sherlock Holmes recently. And just stumbled across one book leads you to the next book. So if I made a list of how many books I've read in inverted commas this year, quite a few. And then Netflix, obviously, got to rest the eyes and just binge watch a few series, and then reading at night is probably the best thing before you fall asleep. Always puts me to sleep.
Absolutely.
2 or 3 pages.
And story.
Yeah.
And with regards to your upliftment programs, do you have any desire to work with kids, underprivileged kids, and pass on your skills to them?
Yeah, I do, and I have done in the past workshops and where they can fit in, and going into schools, and not necessarily always underprivileged, but sometimes even read them, which you can sometimes say, well, if they're not giving a great art education, then they're probably underprivileged.
Yes.
But I would have to smile and think, because my daughter went to Redham as well, and thinking that, the parents who pay enormous fees to get their children to become doctors or lawyers or whatever, and along comes a cartoonist going, hey, forget all that. Why don't you become a cartoonist and struggle for the rest of your life to make a living? But so I kind of go in there going, I'm going to corrupt the young minds and say, but my message is the same. And this from a serious note of my school career as well, is to try and encourage children to find what they're good at. And I know, because when they're kids sitting in that school going, I'm no good at that, I'm no good at this, it might not be cartooning, it might not be art, but it might be something else. But for me, it was, don't worry about school too much, because you get through that and then you got the rest of your life to do, and you should be spending your life, and schools should be doing this too, is trying to help you find what it is that makes you different and what makes you tick, what makes you happy, what makes you get up in the morning and decide, I want to do this. And schools, unfortunately, I know they've got a curriculum and they've got a very rigid, almost one-dimensional way of teaching you. But those who fall through the cracks, there's encouragement to them saying, you know what, just find what you love. And if that's it, my brother and I love this quote, I think it's a Dylan, was the definition of success is waking up in the morning and going to bed at night and doing what you love in between. And not many people can necessarily say that. Sometimes they do, but
very few.
Yeah, and it's not every day for me either. You know, some days it's a crunch day. I've got to do something. I've got to do a job which is not necessarily what I want to do that day, and I'm wanting to get to the painting and do that, but you got to do it. But if most of the time, you can honestly say that I love what I do.
Yes, isn't it amazing that you hear so many times of a talented person who is arty, but their parents made them become a lawyer or a doctor
all the time,
or something else.
And even now, unfortunately, kids being pushed in directions which they don't necessarily want to go in. I mean, it's well-meaning parents, and it's a very difficult one to do because as a parent, you don't want to see your children suffer. Like actors always go, I hope my child doesn't follow my career. That's like Harrison Ford going, oh, sure, it's bad for you, eh? But I suppose, but what parents should be saying is, what do you want? What's going to, because all you want as a parent is your children to be happy.
Yes. I was lucky enough to have a father who said that. You want to do that, do it.
Yeah. A wise man.
Fantastic. Yeah. Gavin, so in a year's time, where would you like to see yourself?
Yeah, I remember this one where they said, when you're in an interview and the guy says to you in a year's time, don't say in that chair you're sitting in. But I'd like to be traveling a bit more. And obviously I'm moving my paintings and prints as well, so going online. So I'd like to be, more online, I suppose. But certainly more body of work and a different direction, and also a bit more of the world as well, so I can work anywhere. Hopefully the UK for a bit.
So basically producing more work.
Yeah,
and
always.
Selling it on your own online platforms.
Yeah.
Are you selling online at the moment?
I am, I do. Obviously, I've also got work in galleries as well. So that, but being here in South Africa, it's kind of difficult selling online internationally because of postage and costs and all that kind of thing. So it'd be nice to have a base in the UK as well where I can work out of. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out yet, but my daughter's studying over there. My wife travels back and forth. So it'll be just the next step for me to travel back and forth as well. But I couldn't give this up. So always be here, but also just being a bit more mobile.
Yeah.
Going back to the London episode, was I was becoming a little disenchanted with London, obviously, and the work. Disney were putting more pressure on to make, obviously they were the high standard, but the high standard with less pay. So the jobs were taking longer. But long story short, I remember coming out on a holiday here and buying a surf magazine and taking it back with me. And the pull-out poster was a bodyboarder actually, and he was doing a bottom turn of this huge wave. And for some reason, I think it's Shakespeare. I'm entirely wrong. I've based all my whole life story on this wrong quote. But it was the tide in the affairs of man, when taken at the right time, can lead to great fortune. So when you're paddling, and obviously if you miss that, you paddle, you miss the wave, it goes past you.
Yes.
If you just hit it at the right spot and you take it, it leads to a great wave and great fortune. And that just sat on my mind and sat on my pinboard next to my desk in London for weeks on end as I looked at it and pondering. And that conversation with my friend about why don't you come out to South Africa and come and work with me was that paddle for the wave and take the wave. And I did it. And I took that wave, and the company that I was with closed down a couple of years later. So I would have been out of a job 2 years down the line anyway. And then I landed the job at the agency here, which then led to me going freelance, and the rest. That so far, so good. I'm still on that wave, basically, and taking it. So that was the tide of the affairs of man at the right time. But also that because as I moved from South Africa to London back and forth, I can remember sitting in the pub the night before I left London again with a pint, and my bags were packed, and I was thinking, why do I keep doing this? Why do I make it so hard on myself? I was doing quite well here. I could have stayed, but there's something that just says go. And it's not comfortable sometimes, but even with the company that I was with here in Cape Town, that pressing thing of going, you can't stay here forever. And I think one of the guys who started with me is still there, and we're talking 20 years later. And he was a guy who told me every year he was quitting. He was saying, this is the last year, I'm leaving next year. And then you go, well, you never left, And so sometimes you do have to be brave, and you have to risk a lot to say, I'm severing that umbilical cord, which is safe, and I'm going my own way. And I'm not sure, maybe it doesn't work every time. I mean, there's probably plenty of stories of people who go, that was the worst thing I ever did. I should never have quit my job. But other people will go, well, I would never, like Sting, you did.
Yes.
And the police, I mean, he was a teacher, and he just said, look, I can see where my life's going to go as a teacher. I'm going to be promoted, and eventually I'll be a headmaster. That's boring. I know exactly how my whole life is going to plan out in front of me. But if I quit being a teacher, the rest is unknown, but it could lead to great fortune, which it did. And another important lesson in that as well is just doing what makes you happy.
Absolutely.
And so you say, well, how can you not be happy? You're in a rock band, and but if you're not happy, and that happened with like Pink Floyd and go, well, rather get out if you're not happy. But so many people stick with what they're not happy for a long, long time. But yeah, and have the luxury to be able to do what makes you happy, because some people say, well, that's very selfish, and not everyone can do what makes them happy. But we should try, because that makes the world a better place. If you look in the mirror and you say to yourself, I don't want to go to work today, or I don't want to go and do the job I have to do today. If you do that more than like 2 or 3 days in a week, then maybe you should. I mean, it's fine to say it once in a while, going, I really don't want to go to work today. But if that's a consistent, repetitive thing, going, I'm miserable, I don't like this job anymore, but you stay with it. So being an artist is not an easy route, but it's probably the most rewarding one. And having worked in corporate environment as well, you're always working for the man. You're not getting anything out of it. He's getting richer. He's growing his business. When you're an artist, you work for yourself. You're working for other people too. Hopefully bringing joy and pleasure to other people at the same time. But essentially, what you put in, you get out. It's all you.
What cartoonist or artist out there, doesn't have to be South African,
okay, yeah,
has really kind of influenced you, or you look at their work now and think, sure, that is really amazing.
Yeah. Well,
this inspires me. And possibly as you've come along your journey, what artists have really stood out and inspired you?
Yeah, many. I mean, my bookshelves are testimony to a compulsion of not being able to pass a bookshop without going in. And yeah, as a sidebar that as well, like when you're starting out, you think that you've got to read the books because it's like how to draw cartoons or how to be and you think that by reading those, it's somehow it's going to exactly, but actually it doesn't really. So you can have a whole shelf full of self-help. So yeah, so going right back to my early cartoon days was probably reading the newspaper here with Andy Capp and Beetle Bailey and growing up on Archie comics. And then painting wise, as I said, probably Roy Lichtenstein when I first discovered him in art classes, and Andy Warhol's, and we did study some weird art stuff, installation stuff and things. But it's always evolving. So cartoonists here in South Africa, obviously Zapiro and Madam and Eve. I was actually living in the UK at the time that Madam and Eve came about, and somebody came over and brought the annual to me. And I was like, wow, there's actually a South African comic strip. So that kind of sowed that seed. It was still another nearly 10 years before I actually put pen to paper. But when we were starting out, Jonathan Shapiro was very generous with his time. I actually rang him because I wanted some advice. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. But he spent a good half hour on the phone, and he's a man of principle, and we were being offered some ridiculous deals by a newspaper. He's like, no, you should. And I could hear someone in the background kind of trying to get him off the phone, and he's a busy guy. And I thought, yeah, look, I've taken up too much of your time already. He goes, no, but give me your number because I want to phone you back. And sure enough, 10 minutes later, he rang me back and followed on the conversation that we were having. And so I always remember that and appreciate that. And then with Madam and Eve, I spoke to Steve Francis, who was the writer. He's an American guy. I don't know if you knew that or not. So he married a South African, and en route to their honeymoon or something, they stopped in Johannesburg at her parents. And he observed this dynamic between the domestic worker and the parents, and that's how Madam and Eve came along. But I always remember the conversation with him, trying to get some information out of him. And then I joked with him saying, well, maybe one day we'll share a page in the newspaper together, to which he uttered some expletive, which I will not tarnish or podcast with, in a joking way though. And then years later, in the Cape Times, we were right on top of one another on the same page together.
That's a lovely story.
So continually part of growing as well is observing other people. So it's like current and going to other people's exhibitions and looking at what they're doing, and it's always evolving. So one can, you have your older influences, but then there's new ones coming on, like the Richard Scotts of the world, and like the Gavin Larkins.
Hopefully.
Always watching,
Yes.
Yeah.
Before, while I was doing some research for this interview, I Googled famous South African cartoonists. So a few names came up.
Yeah.
There's certainly Zapiro.
Yes. Yeah, you would sometimes think there were only two in this country.
Yeah, there's quite a few,
Was my name in that list?
Unfortunately, not that particular Google search, but I'm sure there are others. but Alan Simpson came up, Maindert Vosloo, Colin Daniel, Wouter de Wit. Have you heard any of these names?
I know Colin Daniels. He used to do the Financial Times cartoon in the Weekend Argus. But yeah, funnily enough, I was chatting to a comic researcher as well as a blogger, Mandy Watson. She does a website called Brain Waves with a Z. And we were chatting about the the fact that actually there's very little about South African cartoonists. I don't know about artists either online. Certainly not Wikipedia. I mean, if you can find maybe Madam and Eve on Wikipedia, but you won't find Rico, the artist, and you'll find Germ on Wikipedia, and Zapiro, but you won't find anyone else. So if you do a Google search, you would swear there were only 6 cartoonists in this country. But some of those might, I mean, here in Cape Town, we've got Chip Snadden, who did the Argus for many, many years. We've got Brandon Reynolds, Highlands, who does the Business Day. You got a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. Those are names that are not on my
Yeah.
You've also got Walter Pickler.
I remember, and I'm not sure what publication he was. I think he was also a character, like he used to do a lot of very detailed cartoon people in a scene.
Peter van der Merwe, Martinus van T, Derek Nesbitt.
Yeah, those are current guys as well, Martinez and Derek. I'm on a WhatsApp group with all of them. So I don't know how... Yeah, I mean, considering the TrekNet's been around since 2005, they've turned into a TV show.
Yes.
It's been published. It's yet...
Yeah.
The name doesn't pop up in Google searches. I'm not sure.
Something you're doing wrong on your social media.
Must be, yeah. But with Wikipedia, you're not allowed to do your own Wikipedia page. And so somebody independent of you is supposed to set it up. So clearly, but it's not just me, as I say. There's a decided lack of information out there about South Africa. So maybe someone will pick that up and run with it. Because if you were someone like yourself wanting to find out how many cartoonists there are in South Africa, you'd have a real problem. Because I could sit and list hundreds that have no...
That are not
Yeah, so I'm not sure why that is.
Sure.
But
Gavin,
yeah.
just ending off, have you ever been inspired to do political cartooning? Getting into that area?
Inspired. Wow.
Or not inspired?
No.
Use another word. Motivated?
Have I ever
to
been...
make a political statement, like Shapiro?
I did, in fact, do a political... Well, I wouldn't say it was political. It was political in a sense, but I was the editorial cartoonist for the People's Post for about 15 years. And I have to say it was a relief when they cut the budget and said they weren't going to have a cartoon anymore, because another one of those was I prepared to leap first, or was I waiting for them to just say, we're retiring So I used to do it on a Monday morning. The deadline was lunchtime, and I'd find... just getting into that news and trying to find something, I think Chip said it once as well about just feeling dirty. You're having to get into that squalor of politics. And at the People's Post, it was a very wide circulation. It grew from one publication to 10, which spanned from False Bay People's Post, Hart Bay to Guguletu and places. So you had a very broad audience of, I think it was about 380,000 readers. But you couldn't just cater to the Bishop's Court crowd or the Mitchell's Plain crowd. So it was very hard to find stories that resonated with both. But yeah, so I had a stab at that. In fact, even got nominated for an award, but which I think Brandon took, which he well deserved. But so yeah, I dabbled in that political thing, but I honestly can say I'm very happy not to, because while it's an important aspect, and while Zapiro's and the Brandon Reynolds of the world do a very important job of taking 1,000 words and putting it in a picture. I mean, you don't need to read the news, just read a Zapiro and you know what's going on. It was not for me. I like the fun, and that's what people often, when I do exhibitions and art in the parks and things, people just come along and go, it's such fun. It's fun art. And I go, well, that's it. It should make you smile and make you happy, because we just need more happy people. The editorial cartoons, while they're important, can also just make you go, oh man, it's like, doesn't incite a giggle or a laugh. Sometimes.
There's not always much happiness going on in politics.
No. So yeah, so I've done my time as a editorial political cartoonist, but I'm quite happy to stick in. And with TrekNet too, we might skirt around political issues like poverty or house prices or petrol prices and that kind of stuff. But generally, it's just tongue in cheek, just a bit of fun.
So it's interesting, as a Zapiro, what keeps on motivating after all these years.
Sure.
To plug away at the same thing, even though he does it brilliantly.
No, he's amazing.
Yeah.
But it is all consuming as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you live it.
Yeah.
You get up in the morning, you're listening to the news all day, even when you're out. You even said, when you're at dinner parties, your brain's still going.
And all the flack you take.
Yeah, everywhere you go, people want to know. I saw him the other day I think it was at the Avoid gig we went to, and a woman didn't quite recognize him. We were kind of playing, going, I know who he is. And I'm going, who? Jonathan. But she obviously knew his name. And then immediately goes, But I didn't like that cartoon you did the other day about such. And like he's saying, well, I'm really sorry. It's like, apologizing for a cartoon you did. Like, not everyone's going to like everything you do. But you feel because he's a public figure, you're entitled to come over to him and say to him, I usually like your stuff, but that particular one, I didn't like that one.
Yes,
Shame on you.
I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that don't like his work.
No, totally. And I mean that.
And phone him up and threaten it.
Yeah, no, he has. He said, yeah. But that's the price for fame. Eh?
Yeah. Anyway, Gavin, thanks very much. It's been lovely chatting to you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure.
And I've really learned a lot about Gavin Thomson and what you're all about, what makes you tick.
Pleasure.
I do hope you have enjoyed my chat with Gavin Thomson and have a deeper insight into the name at the bottom of his stunning paintings. This podcast was brought to you by myself, Gavin Larkin Art, and produced by Greg Kokoveas of Branded Podcasts. In our next featured podcast, number 2, I will be chatting to artist Mark Ransom from Camps Bay, Cape Town. Thank you for listening. Hope you have enjoyed this episode of Artist to Artist, where we bring you all the up-close and personal interviews with accomplished South African artists.